Howdy, folks. I'm Rob Lee from Mastermind Team's Robcast, and this is not that. This is an episode of Getting to the Truth in This Art, and today I have the esteemed pleasure of welcoming performer Kinky Slippers to the show. So, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great. I think I checked you out on maybe Instagram through one of my followers here in the local burlesque community or what have you, and definitely checked you out last week on the Sanctuary video. I was like, okay, this was very much a good idea, Rob. So
good. I'm glad to hear that.
yes. So I want to learn a little bit more about your background, and let's share it. What's your background? Tell us about your background as a performer, as a creator, and where you're at. This will be the first episode of this podcast that's not had someone that's in the DMV, the Baltimore, DC area. Mm-hmm. So you're a first for us. So I want to thank you again in that regard. But yeah, tell us about yourself.
Awesome. That's exciting, especially coming from Maine. I'm not usually a first for anything. Or if I'm the first, it's the first in Maine. But yeah, I've been doing burlesque for almost 10 years now, which is crazy. But in Portland, Maine. So it's a lot different than somebody who's maybe doing it out in Seattle or a bigger city where it's more established. I've seen the scene change quite a bit. So so I've been doing it for a while, but I didn't actually really have any dance background before that. I did some belly dancing before that, just kind of for fun. And then before that, I was actually a music performance major, but had early 20s, had that quarter life crisis and fell out of doing music. But it was my entire life. So losing that was a big chunk of my creative outlet and my persona and who I identify as was always a music person. And suddenly I wasn't doing that anymore. So burlesque was my way of finding, finding myself and figuring out what I want to do.
It was some good music choices in your playlist. I recall some Muse, and I was like, I don't think I've ever seen booty shaking to Muse. So I'm here for it. I'm here for that. I was like, let me request Newborn. Let's do it, man.
Yeah, that's what I love about burlesque is that you can booty shake to literally anything you want.
That's great. That's great. So you touched on it a little bit, I think, but if you can delve deeper, what was some of your inspiration, I guess, to get into burlesque?
Well, so I always was really into a lot of the pinup aesthetic, Betty Page and Dita Von Teese, who was probably the only mainstream burlesque performer, at least at the time when I was first getting into it, and had myself a limited scope of what the burlesque world was like. But yeah, I'm the kind of person that I get really into something and then I just go balls deep into it. So I just was this looks really cool and I really want to do this. So I researched places, saw some really cool classes that were all in Portland, Oregon. But I found one class that was in Portland, Maine. And so I went, and then at that one class that I took, the teacher was like, oh, we're doing auditions for this burlesque troupe. Next week. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. Worst case scenario, I don't get in. And then I just audition next time. So
that's cool. That's really cool. So could you describe your maybe first time, first time in class and maybe your first time performing in front of a group of people? How was that? Cause I get, as a podcaster, I've been doing this 11 years, and in doing it in front of people, sometimes I'm like, okay, this joke is not going to land. I know this is not going to land. Or it's someone's going to throw a tomato at me. I feel that's going to happen here. So how was your first time getting out there? It's okay, I'm not as flexible as I thought I would be, or whatever the situation was. And that first time doing maybe what you've learned in front of an audience.
Honestly, it felt really good, especially because at least how I was introduced into the burlesque world, it was really inclusive and creates a space for any bodies and shapes. It's not always like that, but when I first got in, it was a welcoming environment. So it was great, especially like, having left the music scene and finding something new. It was definitely helping me come back to that like positive feeling of having a place of where you're at and being able to like express some creativity.
That's cool.
But it's interesting too, though, because there's definitely there's a lot of different aspects of burlesque where there's different ways that you can be performing or adding different flavors to it. And then also like performing in front of a multitude of audiences that I feel like there's a few different firsts. Like I had my first performance, but then there's also like my first time performing in front of a crowd that is not welcoming and doesn't want to see me. Or
talk about that. Or talk like bombed. You had tomatoes thrown at you. I see. I guess.
Yeah, probably the first. I mean, I've done it a few times, but the first time I ever did it was the worst experience I had. Where I was dancing with a burlesque troupe that I'd co-founded called Stripwreck Burlesque. And we were, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. But yeah, so we were hired to do this gig for, I can't remember exactly what, they were like a bowling league that was having their like anniversary or something. So they invited us to come perform at this like event that they were having. And I could tell there was something off because as soon as we came in the door, the guy who had hired us came running over and was like, no, you're a surprise. You have to come into the back door. And I was like, this could, yeah, burlesque as a surprise is not always a good thing. I mean, like if it's somebody who enjoys the art and has seen it before, then it's great. But if they haven't, and in this situation, they hadn't, and they did not want us there. And it's like so hard to perform for somebody when you're like they don't want you there and you don't really want to be there, but you've already been paid. Right.
It's like, I think like you almost have to have an audience. I always look at things from like in my performance stuff, it's been in the comedy clubs and stuff like that. And I always think of like the idea of hecklers. And it's just like almost that kind of vibe. Like if you're here and you're not here to enjoy what's happening and you're at least invested in it, then you're not going to have a good time because, the performer's going to do what the performer's doing because that's what they're there to do. And if you're just there to kind of like either shit on it or just actively dislike it, one, you suck. Two, it's not going to go well.
Yeah, no, and it's hard. It's especially with live performance, you feed off of that energy. And so if it's a negative energy or even sometimes, especially in Maine, like Maine audiences are known for being really quiet and non-responsive, which is like in burlesque, you're supposed to hoot and holler and like give some feedback while the show is going on. So there've been times even where like I didn't feel great about the performance because there was such a lack of energy. And then I get off the stage and the audience members are like, oh my God, that was so amazing. I was like, why didn't you say anything then? It could have been better.
So it's like, what's the thing when they talk about like jazz that you have people that's snapping or what have you, spoken words like this? So I guess hubba hubba and auga is acceptable. I don't know.
Yeah, or something, or even like one, because I host more frequently now. I've started producing my own shows and hosting them, and that's something where you need to have like some feedback or even like a little bit of like having that one heckler who you can at least like poke fun of and then get the rest of the audience to be like, yeah, that guy's the worst.
Right. So in terms of prepping, because I've seen like a few things. I've seen some of the videos you've done. I think it was it's like this 305 kind of like fitness thing I saw. I thought that was really cool. So it kind of made me think like in this question. So in terms of preparation for a performance, like what do you do from whether it be like I'm going to do my own costume, I'm going to do that because I would assume that some people kind of make their own. Do you do that? And what kind of, I'm sure they're stretching, maybe a 10-mile run or something. I don't know. What do you do to get ready for your performances?
It depends on the show. Definitely a lot of like making my own costumes. But for sure, like I've been trying to step up the costumes. It's like you make a costume once, but if you are not constantly adding more rhinestones to it, then what are you doing?
I dig it.
Yeah. So that's like the week before a show, I'm always like retouching costumes and trying to make sure I've got everything set. yeah, it's stretching, but like, unfortunately, I find lately for myself, I've been at a lot of venues that like have no backstage. Like the backstage area is literally a hallway, like up the stairs on the hallway. You're just like on a couple steps in there, like trying to put your clothes on. So there's not a lot of like options for stretching, which is rough on the body for sure. But yeah, it's, messaging people, trying to get people to go to shows and checking in with the tech and making sure everything's like A-okay. And then checking in with new performers too is a big thing, and making sure that they're like having a good experience and have everything that they, mentally need to have to be okay to get on stage and take their clothes off.
I mean, I'm all about that. So since we've been in this quarantine time, like how has that, not necessarily the performance piece, but how has burlesque changed for you? Cause I guess his performance, so I would imagine it changes a lot because people, but how has it changed for you?
It's been a massive change for sure. I mean, obviously there's been a lot of shows that were canceled. And then also like concern for whether or not the venues are still going to be there for us to come back to after this. I know already one venue is closed. That was a gig, a gig that another producer that I know was going to have there regularly. But also just, at least for myself, I think I'm one of the few performers in this area and few producers in this area that's actually trying to do streaming shows. So I've been trying to do some online streaming shows, and a lot of it right now is more cathartic than actually like a performance. Is even just to like see my other performance friends like creating something and putting something out there. Like I had an open stage night last night, and it was just I could tell even with some of the performances where maybe like a comedian or another performer wasn't quite on their game, but like you could tell they kind of need to like have this moment to like put something out there and have us respond to it, which is enjoyable to see. But yeah, it's been a lot to like, and it's different too. Even the timeline is different. Like if you have like a show coming up, you're trying to like sell it months beforehand. But if you do that with online streaming, people forget about it instantly. So.
Yes. I mean, being that I've been online for forever, I'll have people hit me like, "Man, that was a great episode." I was like, "You listened? When?"
Yeah,
and it's because like purely like that's part of research, which feels weird. I was like, I'm looking at booty, but as part of my research, I was like, I should at least see you perform, albeit like through the sanctuary thing. I was like, I should at least see you perform before I just say, let me have her on there, and then you're like, a sucky burlesque person. I'm just like, oh, she's terrible. What are you doing? And I was like, okay, I'm at least, fine here. Cause I've had, since I've started like this podcast and, kind of rooted in initially just kind of trying to dispel some of the misconceptions about like Baltimore and our art scene here. And I wanted to kind of expand upon it to kind of not purely be Baltimore, but have Baltimore as one of the main focuses, but extend to kind of cover like, you may be people who their art has had a misconception, and I'll be very honest about it. I had a misconception about burlesque. My thing is like, where's the chase and can we cut to it? And that's kind of not.
Yeah, that's the antithesis of burlesque for sure.
Yeah, and I was just like, man, what are we doing here? Like, I appreciate you. I can't do that. I appreciate what you're doing and all of that, but like, so what are we doing here, man? That's where it was at, and I think over like the last few years, like kind of having a better appreciation of it and being more tiny glasses and scarves, like being a guy that's like observing art. So what would you say some of the biggest misconceptions about burlesques are, and maybe what are the lies, if you will, and what are the truths in your experience about burlesque?
I feel like when people try to talk about burlesque, they often talk about it in like absolutes of what it like has to be. Or like I often see this, like people are always trying to compare burlesque with stripping, like commercial stripping, which is like, they fall into a lot of pitfalls of like trashing on commercial stripping to like improve burlesque, which is like is like negating a lot of the background that they both share. And then there's also just shitting on sex workers, which is just not my cup of tea in general. So like trying to promote your form of art as being higher because it's somehow classy, which it's not. So like Dita Von Teese has a great quote where she says the difference between her and a commercial stripper is that she has more rhinestones, which is really what it is. Like, especially with this new wave of burlesque, there's a lot of like, you have some classic performers, you have a lot of performers that are trying to push the boundaries, and they have a lot of the same stuff that's going on in commercial stripping, of like booty shaking and less tease. There's like the tease is sometimes great and sometimes non-existent. So there's that wide frame. But yeah, it's hard. There's so much in burlesque and so many different forms of like, sometimes people are trying to make a statement and sometimes people are just dancing just to dance on stage. And both are valid and fine. So it's like odd to see people have these like absolutes.
Yeah, it can't be I think like, and not to kind of echo back to what I do, but I think art is art, right? And
yeah,
what I always run into, because trying to commercialize what I do, you need to turn it into a business, come up with a class and do a thing on what the real podcast is, because I've been doing it for so long. And we have a, community here that's developing, but we're not really centralized really. And it's like, yeah, so what's the de facto, the 10 things you do as a podcaster? I was like, what? I was like, no. I was like, I talk about dicks and weird stuff on my podcast. I was like, I don't know if I'm qualified, but
yeah,
I appreciate it. So it's kind of one of those things where like people have these ideas of absolutes. And I think with art, there aren't absolutes. It's just like, it's up to interpretation, which is the nature of it, I think. Weird experiences on here. I'm an Aquarius. I am into weird shit. I like lists and weird shit. So, what was the weirdest experience you've had at a show?
That's a tough one. So I have an experience. It's not my direct experience, but it's definitely a weird one. And I won't name names. But
thank you.
Yeah.
Just editing later, like, oh, cut that out.
Yeah, no. But I used to dance with me and a friend of mine used to perform at a venue that did weekly shows. And the director there was, a little bit, could be a little bit much sometimes. But I ended up leaving. And when I was talking to her, she had told me a story of it was a regular show at a restaurant, and we had like our backstage area was like a bit of a walk from the actual stage, and so you had to walk through the kitchen and then get to the stage, and the director didn't want us to be seen like by any of the audience members in our costumes, which is not like totally unheard of for performances. But in order to get to the bathroom, you had to go through the kitchen and then pass the stage and then go through the audience and then get to the bathroom. Oh. So yeah, it's a bit of a trek. So it's kind of impossible not to be seen in costume if you have to use the bathroom. So after I'd left, what I'd heard from one of the performers is that this director's solution was that they should pee in a bucket, and then to dispose of it, they'd have to take it through the kitchen.
As you do.
Yeah, but I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I would have walked like then. And I'm not a person that would normally walk, but like, that's so like demeaning.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I mean, usually, like going back to what you were saying earlier, as far as like your preparation, my preparation includes having space to move around because I'm 6'4", like I'm a big dude. So it's like, oh, you had this small little slither. No, I'm going to knock one of these walls down so I can just have some space. Where's my drink? Yeah. I just go kind of diva, but I need space. And it's just like, to your point, if it was one of those situations where it's demeaning and it's just like perform, it doesn't work. Like we're still people and we're still being very, I think vulnerable when we're going out there, and let alone like, as you get, potentially more nude and you have like a story that you're telling or whatever your, art is, it can be something that's on your mind and can definitely impact what you're doing.
Oh yeah, for sure. And especially in a space where you're, stripping in front of other people, and it's a vulnerable act in and of itself.
Mm-hmm.
So and art in general is vulnerable. Like that's what makes it art. But I've seen so many directors that don't treat their performers with that respect, or even that, like, I don't know, sincerity when they're doing something that's so vulnerable, especially like beginners that are doing it for the first time. And I find it crazy, especially like in Portland, Maine, there's not like a lot of money in this, it seems like almost more understandable, even though it's shitty when people are doing it because they're making a lot of money, but like nobody's making a lot of money and you're just treating people shitty.
Well, I think you might end up being a host of this. You kind of segued into my next question. What are the challenges you faced performing specifically where you're at, or just overall? And actually, I guess pre question, are you originally from Maine?
Well, yes and no. So I like to say yes, but my family's from Queens, New York. So like I was born in Manhattan and we moved over here when I was little. So I've been here most of my life, but you're not really a Mainer if you're not born and raised. So
that's fair. So have you performed burlesque outside of Maine?
A little bit, but not a lot. Maine has been mostly where I perform.
All right, but then my question is still good. Then I think, what are some of the challenges you face there, and how have you overcome them?
Definitely it being a smaller area and burlesque not being as big as it is. I mean, oftentimes, like I go to other places. Like I went to the Vermont Burlesque Festival and had somebody be like, "Oh wow, burlesque do they have burlesque in Maine?" I'm like, yeah, actually, we have like a thriving scene where we have like multiple shows a week. It didn't used to be like that 10 years ago, though. It was like 10 years ago when I first started, it was like you were lucky to get a show where you were getting paid $30. Yeah. So it's funny to see some like newbies now who are like, they're like beginner performers and they feel a little bit like hot that they're making money doing this, even though it's still like not a lot of money. I'm like, man, I remember when this scene was like, there was shows maybe every 6 months and you definitely were not making as much as you were spending on your costume. So,
I mean, that's like, listening to people, like I've been involved in the, the convention scene, like cosplay and so on. And it's just like, you guys are really into this. You're spending a lot of money on what you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's like, what do you do for a living? Like, I'm a data analyst. What do you do? Oh, nothing. Oh. And just like seeing like, how does that work? And even the number you mentioned, I'm a big wrestling fan. So looking at people who did like independent wrestling, it's like, yeah, I got a broken rib, but I made $25 tonight. It's like, what? How? What are you doing? Yeah. What? And this is like our last couple of questions because I told you I'm going to keep it to the 30 minutes. I want to, time is money.
No stress. I'm having a good time being here, so I appreciate it.
That's great. What advice would you give someone who wants to try burlesque, but they just get nervous, like they're just stage fright?
You're gonna get nervous. Like I get nervous before every show, especially if I'm, when I used to perform in Lewiston, Auburn, which is a small town, and we were the only burlesque performances happening there. So when I started coming back to Portland again and performing in the Portland area, like performing in front of my peers was, even though I was performing every week in front of other, a large audiences that don't know burlesque. So it's always more frightening when you're in front of your peers. But honestly, it's always frightening. Like we always want to be putting our best selves out there. We always want to have a perfect performance, and it's just not going to happen. You're not going to, there's always going to be something you can't quite account for, like maybe somebody's loud in the back, just like not paying attention to the show and it throws off your game, or there's something left on the stage, like especially like the amount of things that are left on the stage at a burlesque show. Like the things that I list off for my students are like, there could be donuts, there could be lube, there could be glitter. Like these are all things I've seen on a burlesque stage. So
that sounds like a good weekend, actually. Donuts, lube, glitter.
You just can't account for everything. So you have to just do it is what I try to like push my students is just go and perform. And breathe through it, do what you need to do to prep yourself, and invite your friends who are going to support you and tell you that you're fucking awesome. Because it's a great experience, even if you're not doing it for money, you're just doing it for the enjoyment, like getting that feedback from the audience, you have to do it,
I think you've inspired me to do burlesque or what have you. Put like one like tassel on my tallywhacker.
Burlesque, yeah.
Just like swivel the hips or whatever. And even on my nips. Social media time, shameless plugs. Where can he find you? All of that stuff. Hit me. Just do the download.
Yeah, hell yeah. So I'm on Instagram. I am on Twitter, though my following is minuscule because I've just figured out how to do the Twitter. But I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/kinky_slippers. I've got an OnlyFans. I teach classes, online streaming classes. And right now I'm teaching all my classes for free, like by donation. So I teach burlesque classes, the 305 fitness classes. And occasionally I do have some streaming shows. So if you check me out, either at kinkyslippers.com or on Instagram at kinky_slippers. That's where you can check me out.
Damn straight. Yeah, definitely check her out. I am a fan. And I dig what you're doing. And thank you for making the time. And you've been great. So,
thank you. Thank you for inviting me on the show.
Totally. So for Kinky Slippers, this is Rob Lee from Getting to the Truth in This Art saying that art is everywhere. You just have to look for it.